The Paleolithic world was merciless. Torrential rains washed across open plains, drowning fire and hope alike. Nights froze the skin, while unseen predators prowled just beyond sight. Every dusk was a reminder that survival was uncertain. Families clung together, trembling beneath the roar of thunder and the growl of beasts. Then, by chance, they discovered caves, dark, wet, and inhospitable, yet still a shield against storms and claws. These caverns were not homes by design, but by desperation. Still, within their stone walls, early humans found their first fragile refuge, the birthplace of humanity's idea of shelter. Inside caves, survival slowly transformed into rhythm. Flames crackled against stone, painting walls with shifting light that warmed both bodies and weary spirits. Families gathered around the fire, sharing hunted meat, sharpening stone blades, and whispering lessons to children who would carry their knowledge forward. Beneath the hard earth, graves carved into the floors revealed more than survival. They showed grief, memory, and a respect for those lost. On walls, ochre lines and handprints told stories of animals, hunts, and unseen spirits, proof that imagination had begun to bloom. Within these caverns, life was no longer only endurance. They became kitchens, classrooms, sanctuaries, the first spaces where humanity learned what it meant to belong together. Caves promised safety, yet their shadows often hid danger. Loose stone could collapse without warning, burying families who trusted the rock too deeply. Predators, from cave lions to towering bears, sometimes prowled inside, claiming the same refuge humans sought. Crowds within narrow chambers bred conflict, sparks of anger over space, and firelight marking the first signs of territorial struggle. What had seemed a sanctuary could shift into peril in a single night. Slowly, humans learned that caves were not permanent havens, but fragile shelters. Teaching them survival required more than walls of stone. It demanded caution, adaptation, and resilience. Winter pressed heavily on cave dwellers, each fire's smoke thickening the air until breathing felt like a struggle. Water trickled down damp walls, turning floors into mud, while the growls of predators echoed just beyond the entrance. What once offered refuge now revealed its limits. Families huddled close, yet their survival instincts whispered of change. Safety alone was no longer enough. To endure, humans needed movement, invention, and courage. The crowded cave became a prison, and from that pressure, the first spark of innovation was born. Caves were more than stone shelters. They were teachers. They showed humanity that protection was necessary, but reliance on chance could never last. Inside their shadows, people realized that true survival demanded more than hiding. It required shaping the world with their own hands. That lesson became the first step toward independence from nature's grip. From the flicker of firelight on damp cave walls grew the idea of shelter as creation. Every hut, tent, and house carried the echo of that first dark classroom called home. When early humans left the safety of caves, they stepped into a world without walls. The open land stretched endlessly, but so did its dangers. The sun scorched by day, nights froze bones, and storms rose without warning. Fire, carried carefully from place to place, gave light and warmth, but could not hold back the sky. Sleeping beneath trees or shallow overhangs meant waking to rain or the shadow of a predator. Freedom came with risk, and every breath outside reminded them survival demanded more than endurance. It demanded shelter, crafted not found, built by human hands. As humans wandered from place to place, the vast wilderness offered both threat and possibility. Branches became their first tools of architecture, bent into frames that mimicked the curve of trees. Over these skeletons they draped leaves, grass, and the hides of hunted animals. The result was fragile walls that shuddered in wind, roofs that dripped with rain, shelters that sometimes collapsed in the night. But within failure lived discovery. They learned which woods bent without breaking, which leaves shed water, which hides held warmth. Each structure, imperfect yet essential, was more than shelter. It was an experiment in survival. Knowledge stitched into nature. The first huts gave families a sense of safety, but their walls were thin defenses against a ruthless world. Winds howled through the cracks, tearing roofs from their frames. Rain seeped into the earth beneath, soaking the ground where children tried to sleep. Outside, wolves and hyenas circled, their growls echoing in the night, reminding humans that protection was still fragile. Families pressed closer, hoping the walls would hold. Often, they didn't. Shelters collapsed, leaving survivors exposed once again. Yet each failure carved lessons into memory. Weakness demanded ingenuity, and with every broken wall, humanity's determination to endure grew stronger. The true transformation began when fire crossed the threshold of human shelters. No longer confined to the open ground, flames now burned at the heart of fragile huts. Heat softened the bite of winter nights, while smoke drove insects from the shadows. Predators kept their distance from the dancing glow. Yet fire's power was more than defense, it was belonging. Families gathered close, cooking food, trading stories, watching sparks rise into the roof above. Within that circle of fire, a shelter became something greater, the very heartbeat of community. Around a flickering fire, beneath branches bent and tied by human hands, something profound stirred. These fragile huts were not carved by chance, but created by choice. For the first time, families slept in a space shaped by their own design, no longer bound to the cold walls of caves. Though the roofs leaked and the walls bent, the idea was unshakable. Humans could craft their own refuge. These shelters were fragile beginnings, yet they declared resilience, creativity, and a quiet step toward independence from nature's grip. The hunt was done, and firelight flickered on skins, baskets of fish, and tools carved from stone. Success meant survival, yet it also meant weight. Carrying food, hides, and weapons across rivers and plains drained precious energy. Some lands urged them to stay. A river thick with salmon, a grove heavy with fruit, a valley where herds always returned. Moving on felt wasteful, so they lingered. Camps stretched into weeks, then seasons. Familiar places drew them back, turning migrations into circles. Survival was no longer only movement. Abundance could hold them still, planting the earliest seeds of settlement. The decision to linger forced a new kind of creation. no longer content with branches hastily stacked or hides stretched over a frame. Early humans began shaping sturdier homes. Wooden poles were driven deep into the earth, lashed with sinew, then layered with hides, reeds, or mud to withstand not just days, but weeks. Inside, shallow pits held food, stones steadied walls, and fires warmed the air. These shelters were still temporary, yet they carried a different spirit: resilience. For the first time, people shaped the land to serve their needs, marking the earliest spark of architecture and belonging. As shelters endured, life itself began to settle. Children ran through the same clearings, their laughter carried on the wind, while women stored dried meat and seeds in shallow pits, knowing they would return. Hunters learned the curve of the trails, the bend of the river, the path that led back home. Each season's return stitched memory to the land. Nights glowed with firelight, where elders told stories rooted in a place that now held meaning. These camps reshaped identity. Survival was no longer endless wandering. It became connection, the fragile birth of belonging, the first spark of home. Stronger shelters demanded more than solitary hands. Families gathered, binding reeds, lifting heavy beams, and pressing mud into thick walls. What rose from their labor was more than protection. It was the beginning of something larger. Clusters of huts formed, standing side by side, each one tied to the effort of many. Shared work wove invisible threads between people, binding survival to cooperation. In those rhythms of building, humanity uncovered its greatest strength: community. Together, they shaped not only shelters, but the earliest outlines of villages. Storms swept through the camps, tearing roofs apart and drowning fires in their fury. Winds howled against walls of reeds, and winter's bite pierced every gap in the fragile huts. Yet from each collapse came a revelation. Walls could be thickened, roofs angled to shed rain, shelters placed on high ground or near flowing water. Survival became strategy, guided by memory and adaptation. In bending nature's challenges into lessons, humanity discovered resilience. These early homes were no longer fragile shelters. They were the foundations of civilization's endurance. Around 12,000 years ago, a quiet revolution began. Seeds pressed into soil promised more than a single meal. They offered a future. Instead of chasing herds across endless plains or drifting along rivers, people bent their backs to fields, waiting for harvests. This new rhythm of sowing and reaping demanded something unheard of: permanence. Crops could not follow nomads. They required guardians rooted to the land. And so, homes rose beside furrows, hearths burned where fields stretched, and for the first time, survival was tied to earth itself. Farming had bound humanity to place, forever reshaping destiny. As farming tethered humans to the land, permanence demanded new walls. The flimsy shelters of nomads gave way to homes designed to endure. Stones were stacked into foundations, mud bricks baked hard beneath the sun, and thatched roofs turned away the rain. Geography guided invention. Reeds bound together along fertile rivers, timber carved in dense forests, stone piled high on barren plains. These houses did not vanish with a storm. They stood as rooted markers of settlement. Within their walls, grain rested in storage bits, tools hung ready, and families found warmth across seasons. Architecture had become survival's new voice. As walls grew sturdier and hearths burned through the seasons, permanence shaped more than survival. It shaped identity. Villages pulsed with rhythm. Harvest feasts marked the turning year. Ancestors were honored in whispered prayers, and fires crackled beneath songs shared across generations. Homes became sacred vessels where births were celebrated, elders mourned, and memories etched into walls that endured. Boundaries formed, names carried pride, and neighbors gathered to settle quarrels beneath the watch of emerging leaders. A child born in a hut no longer belonged to the road, but to a people and a place. Belonging, at last, replaced wandering dot. With villages came resilience, a strength no family alone could match. Neighbors raised walls together, patched roofs after storms, and dug channels to carry water to thirsty fields. When predators prowled or raiders approached, watchful eyes stood guard. No longer in solitude but in unity, shared labor wove more than huts of mud and stone. It wove bonds of trust. In hunger, in flood, in fire, people endured because they endured together. The first communities rose, where the power of we eclipsed the struggle. The village was more than a refuge. It became the first sketch of civilization itself. Clusters of huts turned into pathways of trade, shared harvests, and rituals that bound families into something larger. Stone walls and reed roofs hinted at futures of marketplaces and temples. Smoke from village fires carried the first signals of organized life, glowing with promise. From those fragile beginnings rose the idea of society. Every modern skyline still echoes those huts, where humanity first discovered not just how to survive, but how to live together. The first shelters were caves, damp, shadowed chambers that offered protection yet confined the spirit. They were humanity's earliest defense against storms, predators, and the cold. But caves belonged to the earth, not to people. Over time, branches were bound, mud pressed into walls, and hides stretched across frames. These fragile huts were more than simple barriers. They were statements of intent. With every shelter raised, humans shifted from hiding to shaping, from merely enduring to creating. The step from cave to hut may seem small, yet it marked the first true claim on the world we sought to master. As huts multiplied across the land, they became more than walls and roofs. Each dwelling grew into a gathering place where survival blended with connection. A fire at the center did more than chase away the dark. It illuminated stories, rituals, and the shared strength of kinship. Meals were prepared together, victory celebrated, and grief endured as one. Inside these fragile spaces, knowledge flowed from elders to children, binding generations. The shelter of a family became the heartbeat of a community. Here, the blueprint for villages and cities first emerged, proving that civilization begins not with stone, but with a threshold and a hearth. The Neolithic age marked a turning point, when survival ceased to depend on endless movement. Farming anchored people to the soil, and with it came permanence. Shelters once fragile and fleeting became solid homes, shaped from mudbrick, stone, and timber. Villages rose where once there had been only camps. In Jericho, stone towers guarded life within, while at Cathedrals, houses pressed close together like a living maze. These structures were more than walls. They were statements of stability, ambition, and belonging. Permanence bred security, trade, and growth, while reshaping identity itself. For the first time, home was not a passing shelter, but a legacy rooted in land, memory, and community. The story of shelter did not end with huts or stone walls. The same flame that once warmed a family around a hearth now drives steel towers into the clouds. From the pyramids of Egypt to the castles of Europe and the glass skylines of modern cities, every design carries echoes of the Stone Age hut. What began as protection grew into power, artistry, and vision. Homes became monuments, and monuments became city structures that no longer spoke only of survival, but of humanity's limitless imagination. Shelter is more than wood. Stone, or steel, it is the living record of humanity itself. Each dwelling speaks of fear conquered, of dreams anchored to the earth, of families bound together through firelight and walls. Our story is not written only in weapons or inventions, but in the safe havens we built to endure. From the first caves to soaring cathedrals and shining skylines, every shelter whispers the same truth. Survival begins the journey, but civilization is what we build after.